The people everyone overlooks are often the ones who notice everything. The words would echo through Ethan Walker's mind long after that unforgettable afternoon, but when the day began, he believed exactly the opposite. At 12:15 on a bright Thursday in Manhattan, every table inside Ashford House buzzed with quiet conversations. Polished silver reflected the afternoon sunlight pouring through towering windows, and the city's wealthiest executives gathered beneath crystal chandeliers to negotiate deals worth more than most people would earn in several lifetimes. Ethan Walker entered as if the room had been waiting for him. At 38, the billionaire technology founder carried himself with the calm certainty of a man who had spent years making impossible decisions before breakfast. His tailored navy suit, handcrafted Italian shoes, and understated Swiss watch spoke of success without demanding attention, although attention followed him everywhere. Conversations softened. Managers straightened their posture. Staff moved just a little faster. Everyone recognized the man whose name appeared on magazine covers and financial news almost every week. Everyone except the young waitress standing near table 12. Claire Bennett adjusted the sleeve of her black uniform, tucked a loose strand of blonde hair behind one ear, and quietly placed a glass of ice water beside an empty chair before Ethan even reached the table. Her movements were smooth, measured, almost invisible. She never rushed, yet she somehow always arrived exactly when someone needed something. Most customers barely remembered her face after leaving. She preferred it that way. Ethan slid into his chair without looking up from the message glowing across his phone. The board wanted an answer before 2 o'clock. Investors were waiting. Another acquisition depended on his signature. He barely noticed the menu placed carefully beside him. "Good afternoon, sir," Claire said softly. "May I start you with sparkling or still water?" Ethan finally glanced up, more annoyed at the interruption than interested in the question. Honestly, he replied with a dry laugh loud enough for nearby guests to hear. If confidence paid the bills, every shy waitress in New York would probably be running Fortune 500 companies. A few people at neighboring tables chuckled politely. Someone shook their head with an uncomfortable smile. Claire simply nodded once. "Still water it is," she answered, her voice steady, neither offended nor defensive. She turned away without another word. Ethan barely gave the exchange another thought. To him, it was nothing more than another forgettable remark in another crowded afternoon. Yet several members of the staff exchanged quiet glances. They had worked beside Claire for nearly 2 years and had learned something unusual about her. She almost never reacted emotionally. She listened. She observed. She remembered. Carrying a polished tray across the dining room, Claire's blue eyes drifted naturally across the room, not searching for conversation but absorbing details the way most people noticed the weather. A businessman removed his jacket despite the cool air. A woman checked the entrance 3 times within 1 minute. A server accidentally placed a dessert fork beside a soup spoon before quietly correcting the mistake. Nothing escaped Claire's attention, though no one seemed to notice she was watching at all. Near the front windows, the revolving door turned once more. A sharply dressed man stepped inside, paused for less than 2 seconds, then slowly scanned the dining room before continuing toward the hostess stand. Claire looked up instinctively. Something about his behavior didn't match the relaxed rhythm surrounding him. She couldn't explain why. Not yet. But somewhere deep beneath years of practiced composure, an old instinct quietly awakened. She lowered her tray, her heartbeat remained perfectly steady, and for the very first time that afternoon, her attention settled completely on a single stranger. Claire Bennett continued across the dining room with the same quiet grace that had made her nearly invisible to hundreds of customers every week, yet her attention never left the stranger who had just entered the restaurant. He accepted the hostess's greeting with a polite smile, but his eyes kept drifting across the room instead of toward the menu she handed him. It lasted only a few seconds. Most people would never have noticed. Claire did. She placed fresh bread on another table, refilled a coffee cup without spilling a drop, and thanked a family celebrating their anniversary, all while quietly tracking the rhythm of the dining room through reflections in the polished windows and silver serving trays. Everything seemed normal. Almost. The man by the entrance declined a table near the windows and instead requested one with a clear view of Ethan Walker's corner. The request itself was not unusual. His tone was calm. His posture relaxed. Yet he never removed his light jacket despite the comfortable temperature inside. Claire had learned long ago that unusual details rarely announced themselves loudly. They whispered. Across the room, Ethan remained focused on business. His attorney had arrived with a leather portfolio filled with contracts that would determine the future of a rapidly growing software company. Their conversation flowed confidently between market forecasts, regulatory approvals, and expansion plans. Ethan listened with the same sharp discipline that had helped build his fortune, occasionally signing documents while barely noticing the elegant lunch being placed before him. Claire approached with his entree exactly on schedule. "Grilled Atlantic salmon with roasted asparagus," she said softly as she set the plate down. Ethan nodded without looking up. "Thank you." It was the first genuinely polite thing he had said to her all afternoon, although his attention remained fixed on the paperwork. Claire stepped away, but something caught her eye. The stranger briefly adjusted his sleeve, glanced toward the large grandfather clock near the dining room entrance, then rested both hands calmly on the table without touching the menu. Again, nothing obvious. Nothing anyone else would question. Even the security personnel stationed near the front entrance appeared completely at ease. Claire carried another tray toward the kitchen, passing Marcus, the restaurant manager, along the way. "Everything all right?" he asked with a smile. "Very busy today." Claire returned the smile. "Yes. Just busy." She almost mentioned the unfamiliar guest. Almost. Instead, she remained silent. Experience had taught her that instincts without evidence often sounded unreasonable. Inside the kitchen, the controlled rhythm continued. Plates moved efficiently beneath warm lights. Chefs called out orders with practiced precision. Fresh herbs scented the air. Claire paused for only a heartbeat as she reached for another tray, closing her eyes just long enough to organize every observation in her mind. The jacket. The seating choice. The repeated glances toward Ethan's table. The untouched menu. The measured breathing. None of it proved anything by itself. Together, however, they formed a pattern she could not ignore. Returning to the dining room, Claire noticed another detail. Ethan's lead bodyguard had stepped outside to answer a phone call, leaving only one security professional near the private meeting. The timing tightened the uneasy feeling that had quietly settled in her chest. She slowed her pace naturally, never attracting attention, and placed a fresh pitcher of water on a nearby service station. From there she could see both Ethan and the unfamiliar guest without appearing to watch either one. Around her, conversations continued. Crystal glasses reflected afternoon sunlight. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers. The restaurant remained wrapped in the comfortable illusion that nothing unexpected could possibly happen in such an elegant place. Claire wished she believed it. Then the stranger finally reached for the menu for the very first time, but instead of opening it, he looked directly toward Ethan Walker with an expression so calm that it sent a quiet chill through Claire's otherwise steady heart. Claire did not believe in coincidences. She believed in patterns, and patterns were built from ordinary moments that most people dismissed without a second thought. The stranger finally opened the menu, but his eyes remained on the page for less than 2 seconds before drifting back toward Ethan Walker. He never signaled the hostess. He never searched for a server. He simply waited with remarkable patience, as though the lunch crowd around him did not exist. Claire quietly delivered a basket of warm bread to another table, thanked an elderly couple celebrating 40 years of marriage, and accepted a compliment from a regular customer with her usual gentle smile. On the surface, she looked exactly as she always did, calm, courteous, almost impossible to remember. Beneath that composed expression, however, her mind continued assembling details one by one. The stranger had entered alone. He carried no briefcase despite wearing business attire. He had not checked his phone once. His chair remained angled toward Ethan instead of toward the dining room. Even the untouched glass of water reflected a strange stillness. Most diners settled into a restaurant within minutes. This man never seemed to settle at all. Across the room, Ethan signed another document before sliding it back to his attorney. Their conversation shifted from acquisitions to cybersecurity, then to a charity gala scheduled for the following weekend. Ethan spoke with confidence, occasionally smiling, his earlier remark about Claire already forgotten. To him, the restaurant had become another temporary office where important decisions happened between courses. Claire approached once more, this time carrying fresh iced tea for the meeting. As she reached the table, she noticed Ethan's attorney gathering several folders while preparing to leave. The meeting was ending earlier than expected. Ethan would likely stand within minutes. Claire set the glasses down carefully. "Is there anything else I can bring you this afternoon, Mr. Walker?" she asked. Ethan looked up briefly, finally making real eye contact. "No. Everything has been excellent." His tone was noticeably softer than before. Claire thanked him with a small nod and stepped away. She appreciated the courtesy, but it did not quiet the uneasiness growing inside her. Near the entrance, the stranger slowly folded the menu closed without ordering a single item. He glanced toward the large clock again. 12:48. His fingers rested lightly on the edge of the table, neither tense nor relaxed, simply waiting. Claire felt the familiar sensation that had not visited her in years, the quiet awareness that every second suddenly mattered. Marcus appeared beside her carrying a tray of desserts. "Claire, could you bring this to the private room?" he asked. She accepted the tray automatically before stopping. "Marcus," she said carefully, "who seated the gentleman near the entrance?" Marcus looked over casually. "Walk-in customer." "Why?" Claire hesitated. "No reason." Marcus smiled. "You notice everything, do not you?" She answered with the smallest smile before continuing toward the private room, but his words lingered in her mind. Yes. She noticed everything because she had once been trained to notice what others overlooked. Years ago, another instructor had repeated the same lesson every morning. Never focus on the obvious. Focus on what does not belong. Claire had spent years trying to leave that chapter of her life behind. She had traded structured briefings for handwritten food orders, polished conference rooms for polished dining tables, constant vigilance for ordinary routines. Most days, the past remained exactly where she wanted it, buried beneath simple work and quiet living. Today refused to let it stay buried. As she returned from the private room, Ethan stood from his chair, buttoned his suit jacket, and reached for the folder containing the signed agreements. At that exact moment, the stranger rose as well. Neither man acknowledged the other. Neither appeared hurried. Yet Claire's pulse quickened for the first time that afternoon. The distance between them was closing, and every instinct she had spent years trying to silence suddenly spoke with unmistakable clarity. Claire stopped walking. Not because she was afraid, but because every instinct inside her demanded one more second of observation before action. The stranger adjusted his position with quiet precision, allowing two business executives to pass between him and Ethan before taking another slow step forward. He never appeared hurried. That was what troubled her most. People with ordinary intentions rarely measured every movement so carefully. The dining room continued its graceful rhythm, silverware clinked softly against fine china, muted conversations floated beneath the gentle piano music, and sunlight reflected across polished marble floors. No one sensed the invisible tension growing beneath the elegant afternoon. Ethan thanked his attorney, shook his hand, and accepted a final folder before placing it beneath his arm. His assistant appeared from another section of the restaurant carrying a tablet filled with messages that had accumulated during lunch. She spoke quietly about a conference call scheduled in less than 30 minutes. Ethan listened while glancing toward the exit, mentally moving on to the next meeting before this one had fully ended. Claire watched the stranger's eyes instead. They never followed the assistant. They never wandered toward the entrance. They remained fixed on Ethan with patient concentration. She inhaled slowly, allowing herself to separate emotion from observation exactly as she had been taught years earlier. What did not belong? A customer who never ordered. A man wearing a light jacket despite the warm room. A chair intentionally positioned toward a single guest. Repeated glances at the clock. Calm breathing. Measured steps. None of those details proved harmful intent. Together, they formed a pattern she could no longer dismiss. Claire quietly approached Marcus once more. "Could you ask security to remain inside for another minute?" she asked in an even voice. Marcus blinked with mild surprise. "Is something wrong?" Claire searched for words that would not sound unreasonable. "I am not certain." Marcus glanced across the room before smiling reassuringly. "Everything looks fine to me." He rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You work too hard sometimes." Claire nodded politely, but her attention never drifted from the stranger. She knew Marcus meant well. He simply could not see what she saw because he had never spent years learning to read the smallest inconsistencies hidden inside ordinary behavior. Near the entrance, Ethan's remaining bodyguard received a message through his earpiece and instinctively turned toward the front desk after a hostess requested assistance with a delivery driver waiting outside. It was an innocent interruption that would likely last less than a minute. Claire felt the quiet pressure inside her chest tighten. Timing mattered. It always had. Ethan thanked several business associates as they gathered their belongings. One investor joked about another $1 billion waiting around the corner. Laughter spread naturally through the group. Ethan smiled, slipped his phone into his jacket pocket, and finally began walking toward the main exit. At almost the exact same moment, the stranger folded his hands behind his back and changed direction with subtle confidence until their paths would intersect naturally near the revolving door. No one noticed except Claire. She placed the coffee pot she had been carrying onto the nearest service station without making a sound. Every movement around her seemed to slow. The piano melody faded beneath the steady beat of her own heartbeat. Reflections shimmered across crystal glasses. A child laughed somewhere near the windows. A waiter apologized for dropping a spoon. Life continued exactly as it always did, unaware that a single decision made within the next few seconds might change everything. Claire stepped away from the service station and began walking directly toward Ethan, her expression as calm as ever. She did not run. She did not shout. She simply trusted the quiet voice she had spent years trying to forget, because deep inside she knew that if she ignored it now, she might never forgive herself. Claire closed the remaining distance with steady, unhurried steps, every movement controlled by instinct rather than panic. Ethan Walker continued toward the revolving door while discussing the afternoon schedule with his assistant, completely unaware that the quiet rhythm of the restaurant had shifted. The stranger adjusted his path almost imperceptibly, matching Ethan's pace without appearing to follow him. Claire watched the reflections in the polished marble floor instead of looking directly at either man. Reflections often revealed intentions before faces did. She noticed the stranger's shoulders tighten for the first time since he had entered the restaurant. It was subtle. Almost invisible. But it broke the calm pattern she had been studying for the past 30 minutes. That single change was enough. Claire no longer questioned herself. She acted. "Mr. Walker," she called, her voice calm but unexpectedly firm. Ethan turned slightly, surprised to hear the quiet waitress addressing him again. Before he could answer, Claire crossed the final few feet between them. "Please move," she said with unmistakable urgency. Ethan frowned, confused by the sudden interruption. "Excuse me?" Time seemed to slow into individual moments. Claire saw Ethan hesitate. She saw the stranger take one measured step closer. She saw Ethan's assistant glance down at her tablet instead of the people around her. She saw the bodyguard still speaking with the employee near the entrance. No one else recognized that all of those ordinary moments had aligned at exactly the wrong time. Claire reached Ethan first. Without hesitation, she placed both hands against his arm and shoulder, guiding him firmly several feet to the side just as a loud crashing sound echoed through the restaurant. A decorative marble planter near the entrance shattered into dozens of small pieces, sending startled gasps across the dining room. For one suspended heartbeat, complete silence replaced every conversation. Glasses froze halfway to waiting hands. Chairs stopped moving. Even the piano music seemed to disappear beneath the stunned stillness. Ethan stared at the broken planter with disbelief before looking back at Claire. His expression held confusion more than fear. He had not yet understood why she had moved him so suddenly. The stranger immediately stepped backward, blending into the wave of surprised guests now standing from their tables to see what had happened. Within seconds, restaurant security rushed toward the entrance while employees calmly guided customers away from the damaged area. There was no panic, only uncertainty as everyone tried to understand how such an unexpected accident had occurred inside one of Manhattan's most respected restaurants. Claire remained standing beside Ethan, breathing steadily despite the adrenaline quietly moving through her body. Her eyes never left the crowd. She searched faces, movements, reactions. The stranger was already gone. The chair near the entrance sat empty. The untouched glass of water remained exactly where he had left it. Marcus hurried toward them, his face pale with concern. "Is everyone all right?" he asked. Ethan slowly nodded, still processing everything that had happened. "I think so." Claire looked toward the revolving door. Through the glass, she caught one final glimpse of the stranger disappearing into the busy Manhattan sidewalk before the crowd outside swallowed him completely. Ethan followed her gaze. "What just happened?" he asked quietly. Claire remained silent for several seconds. She had learned long ago that certainty should never be claimed without evidence. Finally, she answered with complete honesty. "I believe something did not feel right." Ethan looked at the shattered planter again, then back at the calm young waitress he had mocked less than an hour earlier. For the first time since entering Ashford House, he saw not a shy server carrying a coffee tray, but a woman whose quiet judgment had changed the course of his afternoon. Around them, investigators began examining the damaged entrance while security reviewed every camera in the building. The elegant lunch service had ended. In its place remained a single question that no one inside the restaurant could answer. How had the only person who saw the danger been the one everyone had overlooked? Within minutes, the quiet elegance of Ashford House transformed into a place filled with measured voices, careful questions, and the soft glow of security monitors replaying the same moments again and again. Restaurant guests had been escorted to private lounges while management worked closely with building security to understand exactly what had happened. No one was shouting. No one was panicking. Yet the atmosphere carried a weight that everyone could feel. Ethan Walker stood near the entrance, his suit jacket folded over one arm, watching investigators examine the shattered marble planter. The damage itself was not what held his attention. It was the realization that if Claire had not moved him when she did, he would have remained standing exactly where the fragments now covered the polished floor. He replayed the moment repeatedly. Inside his mind. Her steady voice. Her unwavering eyes. The complete absence of hesitation. Marcus approached carrying 2 cups of fresh coffee. He quietly handed one to Ethan before looking toward Claire, who had already returned to helping other employees restore the dining room. She gathered unbroken glassware, reassured nervous guests with gentle smiles, and thanked coworkers who offered to finish her tables. She behaved as though she had merely solved another ordinary problem during another ordinary shift. Ethan could not understand it. Most people would have welcomed attention after something so extraordinary. Claire seemed determined to disappear from it. Nearby, a security supervisor called everyone toward the surveillance room. Multiple camera angles had captured the final moments before the incident. Ethan entered alongside Marcus while Claire remained outside, insisting she still had responsibilities to finish. The first recording showed the dining room from above. Customers eating lunch. Servers moving naturally between tables. Nothing unusual. The second angle focused on the entrance. There was the unfamiliar guest requesting a specific table. There he was declining the menu. There he was checking the large clock several times. Then the footage revealed something that caused everyone in the room to fall silent. Claire appeared repeatedly in the background, never staring directly at the man, yet quietly adjusting her position to keep him within view while continuing her work. Every movement looked effortless. Every decision appeared natural. She had not followed him. She had simply never stopped observing him. The final camera angle showed the critical seconds before the marble planter shattered. Ethan watched himself walking toward the exit with complete confidence. The stranger altered his course at almost exactly the same moment. Then Claire entered the frame. She reached Ethan just before the unexpected impact near the entrance interrupted the calm afternoon. Security paused the recording. She reacted before anyone else, one investigator said quietly. Another nodded. Not after. Before. Ethan stared at the frozen image on the screen. Claire's expression remained composed even in the exact instant she decided to act. There was no visible panic. Only certainty. How did she know? Ethan asked softly. No one answered because no one knew. Marcus finally broke the silence. Claire has always noticed little things the rest of us miss. We joke about it sometimes. Ethan looked back at the screen. That was not luck. The investigator agreed. No. That was trained observation. Those 3 words settled heavily over the room. Trained observation. Ethan slowly remembered every detail from lunch. The confidence hidden behind her quiet voice. The way she never overreacted after he mocked her. The calm precision with which she moved through the restaurant. None of it fit the simple picture he had created in his mind when he first saw a shy waitress carrying a tray. Outside the surveillance room, Claire finished folding a clean tablecloth before gently placing it inside the service cabinet. She believed the day was finally returning to normal. She could not have been more mistaken. Behind the closed door, Ethan Walker had just reached a conclusion that would change the direction of both their lives. Whoever Claire Bennett truly was, she was certainly not just a waitress. Claire finished resetting the last empty table nearly 40 minutes after the dining room had reopened, and by then most of the afternoon guests had returned to their conversations as though nothing unusual had happened. Ashford House had regained its polished elegance, but an invisible change lingered beneath the quiet routine. Employees looked at Claire differently. Security officers nodded respectfully when she passed. Even Marcus caught himself watching her with renewed curiosity, realizing there was far more to the young waitress than anyone had ever imagined. Claire noticed the attention immediately, and she disliked every second of it. She had spent years building a life where nobody asked questions. She wanted customers to remember the food, not the server who delivered it. She wanted ordinary mornings, ordinary shifts, and ordinary evenings walking home beneath the lights of Manhattan. That ordinary life had protected her from a past she had no desire to revisit. As she removed her apron inside the employee break room, her phone vibrated quietly. A single message appeared from an unfamiliar number. It contained only 6 words. We saw what happened. Are you safe? Claire stared at the screen for several long seconds before locking the phone without replying. She knew exactly who had sent it. There were only a handful of people who still knew who she had once been, and they shared an unspoken agreement never to contact her unless absolutely necessary. Outside the room, Ethan remained in conversation with the building's security supervisor. The surveillance footage had already been copied, and investigators had concluded that the damaged planter had not failed naturally. A concealed mechanical defect had caused the decorative structure to collapse unexpectedly at precisely the wrong moment. Whether coincidence or deliberate tampering remained unclear, but everyone agreed on one fact. Claire had recognized that something was wrong before anyone else did. Ethan found that impossible to ignore. "I need to know who she is," he said quietly. His assistant hesitated. "You mean professionally?" Ethan looked toward the dining room where Claire was carefully polishing a coffee cup as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. "Professionally. Personally. I want the truth." His assistant nodded. She had worked with Ethan long enough to recognize the tone in his voice. Once he became curious, he rarely stopped searching until every question had been answered. Less than an hour later, the first report arrived from Ethan's private research team. Surprisingly, it contained almost nothing. Claire Bennett. 27 years old. Current address in Queens. Employed at Ashford House for 1 year and 11 months. No social media activity beyond a dormant account several years old. No recent interviews. No public achievements. No professional licenses. No explanation for the observational skills clearly demonstrated on the surveillance footage. Ethan frowned. The absence of information disturbed him more than a dramatic history would have. Successful people usually left visible footprints. Claire seemed to have erased hers completely. Meanwhile, Claire stepped outside through the employee entrance for a brief break. The late afternoon breeze carried the familiar sounds of taxis, distant sirens, and conversations drifting along the sidewalks. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply as she reminded herself that the danger had passed. At least, that was what she hoped. A black sedan slowed briefly near the curb before continuing down the avenue without stopping. Claire watched it disappear into traffic. Another small detail. Another pattern she quietly stored away. She no longer believed the events inside the restaurant had been isolated. Somewhere, someone had been watching. Somewhere, questions were already being asked. She had spent years hiding from the life that had taught her to notice invisible threats before they became obvious. Now, despite every effort to remain unnoticed, that life was beginning to find her again. And inside Ashford House, the billionaire who had once dismissed her with a careless joke had just begun searching for the woman behind the quiet smile, unaware that the answers would challenge everything he believed about strength, success, and the people the world chose to overlook. The restaurant closed just after 10 that evening, and for the first time since joining Ashford House nearly 2 years earlier, Claire Bennett did not leave unnoticed. Employees who usually hurried home paused to thank her quietly before stepping into the cool Manhattan night. One dishwasher offered a grateful smile. A hostess hugged her without saying a word. Marcus simply looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You protected every person in this building today, not just one customer." Claire lowered her eyes and answered with the same humility that had guided every decision she had made throughout the day. "I only followed what felt right." Marcus smiled gently. "That is exactly what makes you different." While Claire gathered her belongings inside the employee locker room, Ethan Walker remained in his office overlooking the city skyline. The lights of Manhattan stretched endlessly beyond the glass walls, but his attention never left the thin, investigative report resting on his desk. He had read the same pages 3 times, searching for something that explained the woman he had met that afternoon. Instead, every answer produced another question. A waitress with extraordinary observational skills. No meaningful digital footprint. No record matching the calm precision shown on the surveillance footage. It did not make sense. Ethan pressed the intercom. "Emily, come in for a moment." His assistant entered carrying a notebook. Did the research team find anything else? Ethan asked. Emily hesitated before placing another folder on the desk. Only one unusual detail. Ethan opened it immediately. Inside was a single photograph taken nearly 6 years earlier outside a federal training facility in Virginia. The image showed a group of graduates standing together after completing a specialized behavioral assessment program designed to help government agencies recognize high-risk situations before they developed into public emergencies. The resolution was poor, but one familiar face stood quietly near the back of the group. Claire Bennett. Her expression looked exactly the same as it had inside the restaurant. Calm. Focused. Almost invisible. Ethan leaned back slowly. Suddenly the surveillance footage made perfect sense. She had not guessed. She had recognized a pattern because someone had once trained her to recognize patterns long before ordinary people could see them. Emily looked toward him. The record ends there. After that program, her name disappears completely. There are no employment records connected to the field. Ethan remained silent. He respected people who walked away from power far more than those who chased it endlessly. Whatever had happened 6 years earlier had convinced Claire to leave behind a career most people would have considered extraordinary. Instead, she had chosen a quiet life carrying coffee trays for strangers who rarely looked at her twice. The realization humbled him more than he expected. Early the next morning, Ethan returned to Ashford House before the lunch service began. The dining room was almost empty except for employees preparing tables for another busy day. Claire stood near the front window arranging fresh flowers inside a crystal vase. Sunlight illuminated the room just as it had the previous afternoon, but everything felt different now. Ethan approached slowly, stopping several feet away so he would not interrupt her work. Claire looked up and offered the same polite smile she gave every customer. "Good morning, Mr. Walker." Ethan shook his head gently. "Please call me Ethan." Claire nodded once. "Good morning, Ethan." For several seconds neither of them spoke. Finally Ethan looked directly into her eyes, no longer seeing a waitress standing before him but a woman whose quiet courage had exposed his own careless assumptions. "Yesterday," he said softly, "I judged you before I knew anything about you. I spoke to you with arrogance, and you answered me with dignity. Then, when you had every reason to ignore me, you chose to help me instead. I owe you far more than an apology." Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, she simply smiled. "Everyone has moments they wish they could take back," she said gently. "The important part is what they choose to do afterward." Ethan felt the weight of those words settle deeper than any business lesson he had ever learned, and for the first time in many years, the billionaire who believed he understood people realized that his greatest education had come from the quietest person in the room. The weeks that followed quietly restored the familiar rhythm of Ashford House, yet something fundamental had changed in ways no renovation or new menu could ever accomplish. The polished floors still reflected the morning sunlight. Crystal glasses still shimmered beneath the chandeliers. Business leaders still gathered around white linen tables to negotiate ambitious deals. Claire Bennett still arrived before every shift, tied her black apron with practiced hands, arranged fresh flowers, and greeted every guest with the same calm smile she had worn from the beginning. Outwardly, nothing seemed different. Yet the people around her had learned to see what they had once overlooked. New employees quickly noticed that customers treated Claire with unusual respect, although very few knew the reason. Regular guests smiled when she approached their tables. Security officers instinctively acknowledged her as they entered the building each morning. Marcus often caught younger servers asking Claire for advice, not only about restaurant service but about handling difficult situations with patience and quiet confidence. She answered every question with humility, never mentioning the events that had changed so many opinions in a single afternoon. Ethan Walker, however, never forgot. Several days after their conversation, a handwritten envelope arrived for Claire before the lunch service began. There was no company logo, no legal language, and no business proposal inside. Instead, she found a simple thank you note written entirely by hand. Ethan thanked her not only for recognizing danger before anyone else, but for reminding him that character could never be measured by clothing, job titles, or social status. Along with the note was an invitation to visit the headquarters of Walker Technologies whenever she wished, not for an interview, but simply for coffee and conversation if she ever decided the time was right. Claire folded the letter carefully and placed it inside her locker without making any announcement. She appreciated the kindness, but she had learned that genuine respect never demanded an audience. Months passed, and their paths crossed only occasionally. Whenever Ethan reserved a table at Ashford House, he requested Claire's section if she happened to be working. Their conversations remained brief, thoughtful, and sincere. They spoke about books, architecture, community projects, and the importance of paying attention to small details that most people ignored. Neither of them mentioned the shattered planter again because neither needed to. Some moments became more meaningful through silence than endless explanation. One rainy evening, long after the dinner crowd had disappeared, Marcus watched Claire carry a fresh pot of coffee toward a table where an elderly couple quietly shared dessert beneath the soft glow of the dining room lights. She moved exactly as she always had, unhurried, graceful, and almost invisible. Marcus smiled to himself before turning off one row of chandeliers. Nothing about Claire had truly changed. The only difference was that the world around her had finally caught up to the truth she had quietly lived every single day. As for Ethan, the lesson remained with him long after billion-dollar contracts were signed and forgotten. During meetings with new executives, he found himself listening more carefully to assistants, receptionists, drivers, and servers. He no longer assumed that influence belonged only to those seated at the head of the table. More than once, he surprised his own leadership team by asking for opinions from people no one else had considered. The change spread slowly through his company, shaping a culture where respect was offered before status was measured. Years later, one framed photograph rested quietly on a bookshelf inside Ethan's office. It was not a picture of an award ceremony or a successful acquisition. It showed nothing more than the entrance of a Manhattan restaurant on an ordinary afternoon. Visitors rarely understood why it mattered. Ethan never felt the need to explain. He simply remembered the day a quiet waitress saw what everyone else missed and reminded him that the strongest people are often the ones who never ask to be noticed. Because true dignity does not announce itself with power, wealth, or applause. It reveals itself in quiet choices made when no one expects them, and those who learn to see beyond appearances often discover the greatest strength standing silently right in front of them.